Welcome everyone, and welcome to everyone who's watching the recording now after the meeting. I'd love to welcome our special guest today, Rachel. Rachel actually used to be one of the support group coordinators for Life After Stroke, so some of you might recognize her. And yeah, Rachel is a physical therapist and she lives out in Vancouver. I'm very excited for her to talk more about getting in movement, particularly as this fundraiser is just around the corner. So without further ado, Rachel, the floor is yours.
Stella, can you guys hear me okay now?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so some of you are a little bit familiar to me because I did used to be part of this support group, but it's nice to see that there's lots of new faces here too, people that have joined. So yeah, actually I'm an occupational therapist, very similar to a physical therapist, but different in a few ways too. So some of you probably have worked with both physio and OT before. But one of my really big interests in OT is adaptive recreation. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today, especially as we're getting into summer and we're talking about movement and the more fun the movement, the more likely you are to actually do it and get all the health benefits from it. So I'm going to share my screen. So I just prepared basically some photos for visuals and I'll describe to you. These are some of the examples of adaptive recreation that I've helped some clients get back into here in Vancouver. I know that we're all kind of spread out around Canada and the US. So I have resources that are specific to Vancouver. I'm happy to share if there happens to be anybody that's here. But for the most part, if there's anything that seems interesting to you, I would just encourage you to look into what's available in your city or in your area, because a lot of this equipment is rentable, or there's organizations that actually will help you learn how to use some of this equipment if it's new to you, and they might even organize group events where you can go out and do these kinds of activities. But the first one is biking. So if biking is something that you used to do before your stroke and it's something that's really challenging for you now, there's a lot of really cool adaptations that I've seen. I'm sure there's lots that I haven't seen too, but the ones that I have on the screen, the one at the very top is called a hand cycle. So actually they're all, yeah. So the one at the very top is called a hand cycle. So the way it works is you would sit down in the seat and your legs would rest on the little rungs that are by the front wheel. And then you hold on to the two handlebar grips and you're pedaling using your hands. So that's a really good option for somebody that doesn't feel like they have a lot of strength or coordination in their lower body, but feels a little bit more comfortable using their upper body. And then the bottom two, those are both examples of foot cycles, or at least the bottom left is an example of a foot cycle, but there are options for different types of seating. So it might be that physically you feel like you're able to actually pedal a bike and steer a bike, but you can't maintain that posture. That's a little bit awkward of sitting on that tiny little seat and leaning forward. So there's lots of bikes with different seating options that just give you a lot more trunk control or a lot more support for your trunk and for your pelvis, so you're not having to use nearly as much core muscle to stay upright. And then they also mostly are tricycles, so you have that balance too. So if you feel like post-stroke you're a little bit lacking in balance and it doesn't feel like the safest thing to get on a bike, this is a really good option. And then electric bikes, that's when that's becoming, I think, a lot more popular and accessible. Even if you're in a city that has a bike share program, often you'll find electric bikes, which are just great because it conserves your energy. So again, it depends, if you want to do terrain that's a little bit difficult, but you don't know if you have the strength or the energy for it, or if you want to do regular, flat road cycling, but you're still concerned about having the energy to keep up with it. An e-bike is a really good option. And I just want to say, by the way, if anybody has questions as I'm going, so if it's about any of these pieces of equipment or the activities that I'm talking about, feel free to ask, but I will come back to it at the end in case you prefer to ask when we're not recording anymore. So we have biking. And then we've got lots of water sports. So I don't know, again, where everybody lives, if you're near a body of water at all. But if you are, summertime is a lot of fun to get out on the water. And there's a lot of actually really cool adaptations that you can find to some of the more popular water sports. So these are 3 popular ones. There's more. There's even I've seen adaptations to water skiing, to sailing, to lots of stuff, but these are the 3 that I think, or at least the ones that I've seen most commonly. So the picture at the top is a paddle board. So typically, like, it's called a stand-up paddle board because you'd be standing, but that's really challenging. It involves so much balance and core strength on water. And there's a program that I've been able to work with in Vancouver that does adaptive paddling, just like in the photo, where they have tracks that you can actually park a wheelchair onto. So even if you're not a wheelchair user, it's still a way to sit upright, really well supported, while getting to experience being on the paddleboard. And you like doing your own paddling or having somebody with you who's paddling. But yeah, it's supposedly a tip-proof board. I don't think anything can ever be 100% tip-proof, but in theory, the way that it's rigged and set up, it's really well balanced that when you're sitting in the chair, even if you're shifting your weight a little bit, you're not really at risk of flipping the board. But again, it's a really cool way to experience being on a paddleboard without having to put in nearly all the physical energy and effort that it might take. And then at the bottom left is a kayak. So there's a few adaptations in the photo. So at the back of the kayak, there's little flotation devices, and that's just keeping it stable so that you're not relying nearly as much on your core strength to keep the whole boat stable and upright. And then you have to, worry less about tipping and what that would feel like, how you would get out of the boat if that did happen. And then the paddle itself is actually attached to like a little rung in the middle of the boat. So this person has their hands in 2 places on the paddle, but they just have to go through the motions of paddling rather than holding up the paddle and maintaining the strength in your upper body to keep it upright the whole time. So it's an easy way to be able to take breaks and pace yourself. And again, like, rely a little bit less on that strength and coordination piece. And then on the bottom right, there's a canoe that has a seat attachment. So this would be for somebody, again, who might have a little bit less core strength or trunk control after a stroke, or even just a little bit less energy, because sitting without back support takes a lot of effort and energy, especially if you're on water and you're having to like really use your obliques to stay still. So there's some options for attachments to the seat that provide a bit of back support and a little bit of lateral support, and then even something to sit on. That's again gonna like keep your pelvis a little bit more in place. And there's options like that for kayaks as well. I've seen some people get really creative with adding back support, because usually the positioning in a kayak is not very comfortable to maintain for a while. Like, it can make your back really sore, especially if there's any weakness in the trunk. So like really padding it up and adding, like I've seen people use like obus form backrests and attach them around the backside of the kayak seat, and then also build up the side. So putting like foam and different materials that have some structure, but that are still soft enough that it's going to be comfortable if it's touching you, but all around the sides to like keep you upright a little bit more as well. And then hiking. So I live in BC, so we do a lot of hiking here. And there's, again, some really cool ways to get out on trails even if you are somebody that uses a mobility device. So in the top photo, that's called a trail rider. So it's something here in Vancouver. There's a few places that you can rent them, or you can go out with a guided group if you're needing, like, there's two people that are actually guiding the trail rider. So if you're needing that level of support, then you can, yeah, go out on a guided hike. But it's like an off-road wheelchair, and it has a lot of clearance in the front and back in case it's really like a high gradient uphill or downhill. And the bottom photo is a power chair that's for off-roading, so also made to go on really uneven terrain. But yeah, if you're not somebody that uses a wheelchair or necessarily needs a mobility device, there's still lots of ways to make it a little bit safer for you if there's any kind of impairment in balance or coordination. So when you're going on hikes, there's a lot of depth perception that you need, lots of like roots and rocks to step over. So you'll see a lot of people using hiking poles, and usually people use them to conserve energy because you're kind of taking a little bit of weight in your upper body that reduces how much weight is bearing by your lower body. But it's also just really good for two more contact points with the ground for balance. So if standing on one foot is something that's a little bit challenging, if there's any sort of proprioception or vestibular impairment from your stroke, then that's something that might not be the safest, especially if you're maybe going to get tired throughout the hike. So poles can be super useful. And that's basically it for the ones that I have experience with out here in Vancouver. But I was curious to hear if there's any other favorite summer activities from the group that anybody just wants to discuss, anything that you either used to do and haven't been back to yet, or you've tried to get back to but have had some challenges with.
I had a quick question. I used to love golfing. I'm wondering if you've heard or seen of anything as far as golf, like I don't know.
Yeah, I have. Is there anything in particular, like any skills that are required in golf that you're personally finding challenging that you want kind of solutions for?
It's mainly my balance. Like I just want to be able to, like, I've watched a lot of videos of people swinging with one arm, and I want to be able to try that. But I'm just wondering if there's anything out there that would assist with that. Like I walk with a cane, so my balance is kind of um I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, just wondering if you've heard of anything out there.
So, okay, so you're looking for more one-sided solutions. I There's nothing that's coming to me off the top of my head, but I'll do some research for you and I'll send it out in a follow-up email because I think that's probably something that a lot, like, golf is a really popular sport. It's probably something that a lot of people would want to help with.
Great.
Yeah, with the balance and the coordination, practice is super important. I heard actually, this is an analogy that I've used a lot, that I got from one of our guest speakers probably a year or two ago, but it just made so much sense to me. But he described the pathways in the brain that are affected from a stroke as like an overgrown trail. So having to do like a lot of bushwhacking and like using a lot of effort and energy to get from one side to the other. But then the more that you walk it back and forth, the easier it becomes. So that's very, very true with any kind of voluntary movement. So if it's the coordination, if it's the range of motion, it's really, we know that it's not coming from your muscles that they've lost that ability. It's that the brain is just having trouble piecing together all of the steps that you need to get there. But yeah, thanks for bringing up golf. I'll definitely look into it and I'll send out something if I can find any good resources.
Great, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or sports or activities that they're curious about? Okay, I'll ask again after the recording just in case. But this is the last slide that I have for us, and this is just specifically related to the fundraiser that Ella was just introducing. So I wanted to just give a couple of helpful hints. They're probably things that you're already doing or are intuitive, but you might just, benefit from a reminder to yourself every once in a while when you're working towards a goal of how to kind of make sure it's safe and as successful as possible. So in terms of, I put training, but because this is an event that spans the whole month, this will kind of apply to the entire event of getting your movement in. So one strategy that I would recommend is making sure you really know what your tolerance is. So that's going to be different for everybody. And I would recommend actually just sitting down and reflecting on, like, what does it really feel like in my body? What does it feel like in my brain when I've like reached my limit for activity in a day? So that could be physical activity, it could be cognitive activity, could be just being on your feet, like could be doing stuff around the house. But figuring out roughly some parameter of like, okay, this is how much exercise or just activity I can handle before I feel like I just need to take a nap, I need to lay down, or maybe I'm done for the day. And whatever that is, cut it in half. So you ideally don't want to get yourself to that point, because at that point you're going to need a lot of recovery time to get those resources back. So if you're able to be in tune enough with your body, with those like physical symptoms or cognitive symptoms of fatigue, to be able to say like, okay, I'm around a 5 out of 10, and you're able to kind of have that discipline to take breaks, which can be really hard because we're in a culture that's, very like go, go, go. We really value doing stuff, and it's pretty counterculture to relax and to take breaks and give yourself permission to be slow. But that's how you're gonna, in the end, get the most done. So if you're going for maximum kilometers, you're most likely gonna get more in if you break it up into, like I said, half of your tolerance at a time, whatever that is, than if you were to try to like really push it and then maybe end up needing to take like several days off. And those breaks are also going to be dependent on your tolerance and your body too. So for some people, that might be like just a 30-minute break to sit down and watch a show or read a book or something, or take a nap. For other people, it might be a longer break than that. It might be, sleeping it off for a full hour or laying down for a full hour or longer. So it's all very personal, and just a suggestion to like really pay attention to what that looks like for you. And then as far as choosing, because this is open-ended, it's all just about movement. So choosing what you're going to do, just keeping in mind what feels safe. So that's in terms of the activity, but also the environment. So if you're wanting to push yourself to do something that you haven't done in a little while, and you want to like maybe take this opportunity to push yourself a little further, kind of make sure that there's a safety plan in place. So it could be having somebody with you that you trust to get you home if you're feeling like I've overdone it, or just making sure that you have access to places to rest or water or whatever you might need to kind of regain some of that energy. So for example, like if you're walking, instead of trying to go a full kilometer in the opposite direction of your house and then needing to make that full kilometer back, like just doing a few laps around the block and then maybe working your way up if you feel like your tolerance is improving. And then I already talked about this, but using mobility aids, even if it's not something that you do day to day, when you're pushing yourself, it's really important, like I was saying before, just to have those safety measures in place. So if you're, for example, let's say you have a cane or you have a walker or something to help with balance and mobility, and you'd rather not use it or you haven't needed it in a little while, maybe just bring it with you and have somebody else hold on to it just in case. And then, yeah, the walking sticks, I would highly recommend. I talked about them for hiking because of like the uneven terrain, but they're great just for walking too, because you're also getting a better full body workout when you're using walking sticks. Like you're involving the upper body, which normally you wouldn't be doing much of when you're walking. So it has that element of like a little bit of support with balance, and it's a bit safer, but it's also giving you a better workout than just walking. So I think there's a lot of benefits in using them. And then just planning. So when you have a schedule, if you're somebody that does keep a schedule and a planner, and you're somebody that wants to like plan that into your schedule, I want to do this amount of exercise or movement on this day. Just look for the days that you don't have a lot going on, or the things that are going to tire you out the least. And again, that's probably pretty intuitive, but there's definitely a benefit in planning ahead, because often we get caught up in just wanting to do more because we're feeling good, and not taking those breaks or pacing ourselves as much as we could, because when you feel good, it's natural to have that be motivating to keep going, rather than to take that step back and regain some of those resources before you keep going. But that's it. Those are all my tips. Does anybody have any questions about this? So specific to the June fundraiser, or if there's any, other personal fitness goal or anything that you have for yourself that you might be training for?
I have a question not necessarily related to myself, but just a curiosity. Is there any like more stabilizing shoes? Like, is there any shoes that are you recommend or don't recommend because they're more stable than other shoes, or no, not necessarily?
That's a really good question. I don't know, but I think that's a great question.
Cool.
Ella, I saw you unmute. Do you have any information?
Kind of. So yeah, that is a really good question, Julie. I have nothing like specific for stroke survivors or really just for runners. So when I went to go get my runners recently, like the person watched me run and she's like, actually your one ankle is rolling. Like whether that's from weakness or it's a strokey thing, I don't know. And so the shoes that she picked for me actually have some built-in support around the ankle, just to keep that a little bit of stability there. And the shoes that I wear are actually called Brooks. That's the brand. But if you have a running room or any running store, like a specific running store by you where they really know their stuff, they will definitely be able to help you out with what shoes have more support and wear on the shoe.
Yeah, it's a great idea to like go to a running store, especially like if they are going to take the time to watch you run. That's gonna probably be the most useful information. Are there any other questions before we end the recording?
I just had something to say about the shoe thing. It's not really shoes, but I got on my orthotics, my podiatrist put bars, or not bars, but just material around the heel, so it reduces like heel rocking and helps stabilize my ankle, and it has been really helpful.
Cool.
That's a good tip. I was going to suggest if you have the ability to, if you have any coverage, to see a podiatrist. That definitely couldn't hurt if you have any instability or weakness in the lower body, because it all trickles down. Even if it starts at like the low back or the hips, it all trickles down eventually to the feet. So podiatrists tend to have a lot of good tips, although some expensive. So if you have coverage, that's ideal. Thanks, Annie.